Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Welcome back to Government Contracting Weekly, where each week we aim to bring you strategies, tactics, techniques, and also good insights into how to win government contracts. This morning we're going to focus on the important issue of why technology really matters in the government industry and also the trends in procurement. This morning we're going to start with Rick Parkington. He is the CTO of STG. And then we're also going to hear from Osterthaler, who's the President and CEO of SES Government Solutions. We have a lot of information to cover, so let's get right to it. Good morning and welcome to our segment today where we have with us an expert. This morning I'm delighted to introduce you to Rick Parkington. Rick, good morning.
Good morning, Hillary.
Yeah,
thank you for having me here.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. And Rick is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at STG, and also a Senior Vice President. And what I'd like to ask you, Rick, for our audience perspective is, I know that you were with the Navy for many years, and you've also been a technology officer for many years. Tell the audience a bit about your background.
Well, starting way back when, Naval Academy graduate, opportunity to serve our nation with the Navy as a Navy pilot, and a lot of background in the ability to look for innovative opportunities for employing the sensors that we had, the electronics that we had, how to conduct the mission in a more innovative way with what we had.
As a pilot you were doing that?
As a pilot.
Really?
As a pilot. Anti-submarine warfare.
Do most pilots do that, or was that unique to your interests?
Well, actually that became a passion of mine. And so I had the opportunity presented with programs called Bear Trap and others that we had along the way with specifically the anti-submarine warfare community. So I got that kind of an experience that led to more IT background and IT innovation, eventually to be the technology assistant to the Director of Defense Intelligence Agency.
So did it come out of your own personal interest, or was it ever sort of like directed that you should be more into the technology, or did you strategically think of the future where technology is who I should be and where the future is for this nation?
Hillary, that's exactly how it evolved. It was personal passion that drove that. Now, the opportunity had to be there also. You can't just decide I'm going to invent today and you run with it. But the opportunity was there, and I was very fortunate to follow a career that allowed me to perform that type of activity, that type of personal interest. With Defense Intelligence Agency, I had the opportunity to get to understand a lot of what our nation has, the crown jewels of technology, what we do, what we actually do, how we use it, how programmatically it fits over the years, and what the trade-offs were between one capability and another. It became a personal drive.
Drive from passion.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, it was, and that's what led through the rest of a career in life after Navy as a consultant with a small firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers, but be able to deliver as a Chief Technology Officer for Sarnoff Corporation, for General Dynamics, and now here for STG. And here with STG and other degrees that I got along the way out of George Washington University and other educational background, here at STG, I not only get to apply that background that I have, that insight that I have, that I was allowed to gain, that a lot of other people supported me in gaining, but coincidentally, I'm also responsible for our IT department, so I get to suffer what we turn to our customers and say, what are the kind of things that you're needing right now? I get that kind of grounding.
Great. So, as a member of the audience this morning, we get a lot of feedback from small businesses, and I thought, Rick, maybe you'd like to share with the audience something about STG that's a little unique. Actually, most people may not have heard about in terms of your background. Yeah,
very good. STG Incorporated was founded 26 years ago by Mr. Simon Lee, who was an immigrant to America.
From
Korea, from South Korea.
Oh.
And his personal passion, Mr. Lee, Simon Lee, is a businessman, he's an entrepreneur, he's a philanthropist. What he did in building this company around three tenets that he has: take care of the employee, take care of the customers, and that circles back around to take care of the company. He calls it the circle of success. It's what he is encouraging to other small businesses to pursue. This is the way the small businesses have the opportunity to actually build their capabilities, gain the customer intimacy.
And be different than a lot of the big companies that can't be that close to their employees.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So it's been very successful for him. $250 million now. It's a successful model.
Right, yes, I would think so. And then in caring about your employees, it means they give their all. I've always thought that, what is it they say, you can pay people to work for you, but you can't buy their hearts.
That's absolutely right. So providing that kind of support to the employee, it actually fulfills that full circle.
That circle. And what about your role? So what you fulfill with the employees, do you inculcate that in your leadership style? Tell us about your role and your style.
My role and my style. Here at STG, my role is a fairly broad role. I mean, the role of a chief technology officer has migrated from time to time from, as the term itself is only about 15 years old, 15, maybe 17 at most.
Yeah.
And so in the smaller companies, CTO role tends to be more of a focused role of one particular technology, build out one particular innovation. At the much larger companies, it's far more about a portfolio.
And security as well.
Security. So we have focus areas of cybersecurity. We have the network operations. We have the engineering of mission systems, software engineering, language services. We have a broad set of capabilities. My role is making sure that we have innovative capabilities that are not only learned about, understood, encouraged in the headquarters, but also out in the field. So the solution architects who work for me have those particular areas of focus, and they actually go to the programs and they go to the customers and they help with the pursuits and so
that's very unique.
Across the board.
Special. Yeah. What I've also thought that CTOs often have a thankless role, because I always say, do any of our employees get up any morning, do any members of our audience get up and say, oh, my technology works, my handheld works, let me email my CTO and thank him, it's working today. I would think every single call you and your department get is something's gone wrong. Is that true, or how rewarding do you find it?
Interesting. We just had a discussion just the other day with one of our team leads for Department of State, where we provide support for platform as a service. It's one of the tiers of cloud computing. They're innovative. The question was, if we go toward chargeback, how do we do that? Do you know, can you help me? If we move toward different technology base that we provide within this platform as a service, can you help me? What would that be?
So more consultative.
Consultative, yes, but as well as encouraging. Mm-hmm. So
very positive.
We do have a lot of that interface. I mean, we have to select the right people also. Our solution architects are fantastic.
Yeah. Handpicked by you? Or,
yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And when you say fantastic, what do you mean fantastic? Well, what is that characteristic you're looking for?
They're all in. Much like you talked about the employees before, they are all in.
Their hearts and souls.
Their hearts and souls. This is about making the customer's life better. Therefore, their users are better off because of technologies, because of innovations. Our employees are better off, more informed. They have 5 areas of responsibility. They have to keep abreast of current technology. They have to share it. Mm-hmm. So knowledge management across the company is very important. They have to help with current programs. They have to help with pursuits, which whether it's the dialogue that they have with the customer, or whether it's white papers to be written, or whether it's actually helping to draft proposals.
Yes.
And then they have to innovate. And they all relate.
So you're also bringing the best out of people because you're having them really use their minds. You're not. Yes, that's very important.
They absolutely have to use their minds.
Yeah.
Key.
Many people think that, to some degree, technology is actually a commodity. I have the instinct, actually, Rick, that you're not going to agree with that, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Why does technology matter? Is it a commodity? And where is technology going?
Well, good question. I believe we have a human condition that wants technology to be a commodity. Make it easier. Make it easier for me to understand.
Customize. Make it all the same. I get it. Yeah.
I don't have to. The double click. Mm-hmm. The double click became inherent to the way we know, and now we're back to single clicks on using our computers. But the idea of making things so standard that I don't have to stop to think about it, I don't have to stop to use it, to think of how I'm going to use it. commoditize it. But that goes from the small perspective of a handheld device or use of a computer or whatever the technology might be, ease of use, all the way up to large-scale programs where there's a perspective that if it's good for the little program, why shouldn't it be good for the big program?
And in a situation in warfare where split-second decisions need to be made, and somebody might go to their instincts versus their knowledge.
It wants to have that as a commoditized capability. However, that commoditized capability may not fulfill mission, and it may not allow for the total cost of ownership to be right for the government. I mean, we only have a certain...
Tailored.
So in some cases, in a perfect example, that with our one of our programs, Consular Lookout, where anyone applying for a visa across the world has to go through a name check, through a system that we wrote, the software that we wrote, customized, has not failed yet. Hasn't failed yet. Not expecting it's going to fail. It was customized. Then again, with appropriate insight, the government says, as we won the follow-on competition very recently.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The government said, you know, we should look at not only the customization, but we should also look at COTS. So 2 tasks.
Yes.
Keep the train on the tracks. Make sure that we don't fail. You've done this so far, keep us going. But also examine COTS and see if we can get the benefit of COTS so that we can...
Utilize again instead of having to reinvent the wheel. Yes.
Absolutely. Or instead of continuing to tune something that's so specialized, maybe there are other capabilities.
And other applications as well.
Exactly.
Do you see COTS becoming more prevalent as the government's looking to become more efficient then?
That there's a push to use more COTS. Well, more COTS is available today than it used to be.
Yeah.
And so the functionality is typically more readily available through COTS, but they're still mission specific that, and we shouldn't be assuming that COTS is an out-of-the-box capability.
No,
so
not
much
necessarily.
Of COTS has to be customized in its implementation for its utility. But we really, as an industry, I believe we're all looking for, just as the government is, how do we make efficiencies happen out of COTS when it can be there, GOTS, government off the shelf when it can be there, or customization when it can be there.
Key Solutions is all about winning, always via the principle-centered approach. This morning, I'd like to ask you, Rick, from your perspective as CTO at STG, for our audience, what do you think are the 2 keys for winning for you?
Well, at the cost of sounding repetitive, innovation, innovation, innovation. If we're not innovating, what difference are we providing to the customer? Who's looking for difference? Who's looking for moving their capabilities further upstream, more efficient, more effective? The second that goes hand in glove with that, and it's a yin and a yang. It's not really number one and number 2. It really is customer intimacy, customer focus, understanding the customer mission in a way that you develop this mutual trust that you're going to deliver.
Those great keys, 2 very good keys. Thank you for joining us this morning, Rick.
Thank you, Hillary. Thanks to AOC Key Solutions.
Yeah, thank you. It was fascinating to hear from Rick Parkington at STG that even with a company as large as STG, being entrepreneurial and having an entrepreneurial spirit is really important as technology matters and it's ever evolving and at a rapid pace. Let's now listen to Tip Osterthaler. He's here from SES Government Solutions, and Tip has some interesting insights and some recommendations regarding the entire procurement process. Welcome to our segment where we have a local expert with us, and I'm delighted this morning that Tip Osterthaler is with us. Good morning, Tip.
Good morning, Hillary.
Tip is the President and CEO at SES Government Solutions, and you have a unique background because you have government experience, but you also have a military background. I will mention that you were at the Royal College in England, but could you explain to our audience, what is it about your background that you think is very unique that you bring to SES?
Well, I don't know that it's absolutely unique, but the experience of having been in the government for 28 years before I came into private industry is one that I'll certainly never forget. It'll always influence the way I think about serving the government. And I think the unique insight that I've gained from that is that it's easy sometimes to criticize the way the government does business, but the government is very constrained in what they can actually do. And having an understanding not only of the complexity of the problems, but the very difficult environment in which the government has to execute procurement decisions is an important insight that I took away from that, and I try not to forget that.
And I would say understanding those constraints makes you particularly sensitive to all of their issues.
Well, I mean, you try to be patient, you try to be sensitive. Sometimes it's a little frustrating. I mean, but even when I was in government, I was sometimes I felt like I was overly constrained and not able to make the most sensible economic decisions from time to time, and that was difficult. But it's just part of the reality of working for government.
That makes you very realistic about the situation.
Well, I do tell my people, you know, don't bring me a problem that requires me to rewrite the federal acquisition regulations in order to solve it, because I probably don't have enough time to do that.
Or what is it Reagan used to say? Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions.
Well, that too.
So TIP has a particular understanding of all the constraints that the government is facing, and from those constraints and from what you've seen, what are some of the best lessons you've learned?
Well, in this particular industry segment, what I've learned is that there's an insatiable demand for bandwidth on the part of the government, and most of that bandwidth is going to have to be provided by commercial companies such as the one that I represent. And there's no central plan, there's no master architecture, there's no obvious way to integrate the capabilities that this industry segment brings with the capabilities that the government provides on its own. And it's a particularly vexing problem, and it's one that I spend a lot of my time thinking about.
And what ways do you solve it?
Well, I don't know. There are no easy solutions. But one of the preconditions, I think, to better address the whole range of problems that comes along with this reality is that there needs to be an acknowledgement on the part of the government that commercial satellite owner-operator companies like SES provide essential communications infrastructure for global Department of Defense operations. And that might seem obvious, and it's very easy to say it, but unless you think about the problem in those terms, what you continue to do is sort of sub-optimize. You work one network at a time and one problem at a time without a view towards the implications for the entire system. So
you're looking very broadly at the whole industry then?
Well, we have to. I mean, yes. SES is a global communications company. The Department of Defense is a global consumer of communications capacity. But there are very few companies that actually operate on a global basis. We're one of only a very small number.
Being in the satellite industry, Tip, could you share with our audience in terms of, most people have heard of satellites, they know it's global communications, they know that obviously, you've mentioned there's only a few companies, not like an innovative small little company can start building satellites and launching them. But describe to our audience and talk about the actual size of the market and what it is you're doing versus the whole terrestrial infrastructure.
Right. Well, the size of the global satellite market for U.S. government amounts right now to about $1.2 billion a year in purchases of just straight commercial capacity and what we call the fixed satellite service operators. And there are only a few of those, as I mentioned before. What fixed satellite services consist of is a number of satellites that are orbited over the equator, about 22,000 miles above the Earth. And the reason they're in that particular location is that causes them to remain stationary when they're observed from the ground. Mm-hmm. So they're rotating around the Earth at the same rate that the Earth is rotating. And what that enables the government to do is communicate from any point on the Earth where that satellite's in view to any other point on the Earth. So almost more than a quarter of the Earth away. You couldn't communicate any other way by doing that unless you laid wires or fiber optic cable or something like that, which is extremely expensive and very difficult to do. So satellites are inherently very flexible because they're in space. They're resistant to things like fiber optic cable cuts and all the other things that terrestrial communications have to deal with. They're an essential part of global communications infrastructure. They're relatively expensive on a kind of a cost per bit basis.
Which is why there's so few companies in that space.
Right. They're very expensive to build them, and the average cost of one of those assets is more than $300 million when you get it on orbit. Our company currently operates 52 satellites on geosynchronous orbit, so that represents a lot of deployed capital. And because they're expensive, they're not used for everything, but for really responsive, flexible, essential communications, satellites are a very important part of the global communications architecture.
Yeah. Tip, if I may quote you, one of your quotes that I know that you're very passionate about, and our audience may not have heard this, is that you say that the federal government buys satellites the same way that it purchases janitorial services or any other, commodity. I know you're passionate about that that sort of issue in the procurement milieu. Could you expand upon what it is you're talking about and how you would love to see that environment changed?
Sure. The reason I say that is because I'm trying to make, I think, a very important point. The way the government typically deals with service providers and technical service providers is through these indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, IDIQ contracts. And that enables them to sort of pre-negotiate terms and conditions and prices in advance, and then to order
as they like
in sort of an expedited basis, and it streamlines the process. Well, that can work quite well for the government, and the government buys a lot of things that way. The problem with buying satellite communication solutions that way is the financial dynamics of the industry are completely different than they are for service industries. As I mentioned earlier in our conversations, these assets cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They live for 15 years or so. And so
because of the innovation of technology. And
well, I mean, they're built to. They can't be maintained in space. So you build them very robustly, and they typically last about 15 years before they have to be retired and replaced. Those long-lived, highly expensive, very expensive assets are not like the normal service. They're not like the things you see in the normal service industry. You can scale up janitorial services instantaneously, and you can scale them back. You can buy them short term. There are lots of potential providers. They enter the market very easily, and they leave the market.
There's low price of entry.
Right. Satellites are just not like that. And so the problem with buying satellite capacity on IDIQ contracts is there's no incentive for the companies to make the investments that will be important to the government in the future. And the biggest challenge we see right now, for example, in the new national security strategy, which is increasingly focused on the Pacific, if we look at that part of the world, there are very few commercial satellite assets that are available for the government to purchase on. The government is 80% or so dependent on commercial capacity, not on their own assets. And when they go out into the Pacific, you're going to find out if there's a crisis someplace, and we reach out to the commercial industry, that there's very little spare capacity there. And there's very little ability to scale that up in the near term.
So actually, in the long run, the government's hurting itself with that approach.
Well, the risk, they have a serious risk of non-availability because there are no incentives to make the necessary investments. And continuing to buy only on the short term, without any long-term planning, without any incentives for the companies to make the investments, is a very risky strategy.
They'll eventually eliminate the competition. So Tip, I mean, you mentioned that the government obviously is looking and needs satellites for national security for many purposes, but of course there are some impediments in terms of competition and encouraging it. Since it takes about 3 years to build a satellite, you're looking at commercial payloads, balancing those payloads. How do you weigh the balance with national security issues, and how secure are your satellites now?
The satellites they're physically secure because they're more than 22,000 miles above the Earth. And people talk about, Chinese anti-satellite programs, things like that. Those are low Earth orbiting satellites. So geosynchronous satellites would be physically hard to attack.
What was it that Margaret Thatcher said when she was asked about her opinion of Star Wars? And she said, well, at least those Greenpeace people can't chain themselves to the satellites. So she felt that same way, yes.
We build a lot of features into our satellites because there's sort of a general, I think, assumption that commercial customers are less concerned about continuity of service and security and things like that. It's really not true. For our commercial customers, such as television broadcast networks, they encrypt their signals. It's intellectual property. It's very important to them. They need to have highly reliable systems. If you lose the last 20 seconds of the Super Bowl with NBC or whoever the broadcast network might be, they're not going to be very pleased.
No, very unhappy nation.
And our government, expects highly reliable services, and we provide highly reliable service. We build into our satellites some features that are specifically there for the government for what they call information assurance. We invest a significant amount of money to do that. Not all companies do that, but SES has invested somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million in the last 6 or 7 years just in specific features on the spacecraft to satisfy U.S. government desires for higher levels of security. So the fact that we have many different satellites, we have many different pathways for the government to use, gives you a robust system, one that's not easy to disrupt system-wide, even if you were to disrupt 1 or 2 assets. Again, we have 52 geosynchronous satellites on orbit, so there's a lot of different services on a lot of different satellites. And really, that has sort of an attractiveness all its own. When the government own systems become increasingly expensive, as they almost inevitably do, you end up with a very small number of assets. And so that represents a vulnerability in a network too, because if you only have a small number of assets that need to be attacked, then it's worth someone, putting more effort into attacking them.
Yeah.
So security is important, but security is important to us for our commercial customers as well.
Tip, our audience is watching, I believe, so that they can learn how to win government contracts. Key Solutions actually focuses on the winning and how do you win a government contract. So I'd love to ask you about the keys to winning, and I know that obviously everything from balancing payloads to managing the profitability so that you can be competitive and provide for the government at issues. But what do you view as the keys to winning for SES Government Solutions?
Well, I think the very first key to winning in this industry or any other one that deals with the government is understanding the problem the government's trying to solve from the government's perspective. So there's a tendency in a lot of industries, including our own, to go to the U.S. government with a product, something that we've already invented typically for some other customer, and try to make it appear as if it's the key to their problem.
Versus listening to them first.
But you really have to listen. You really have to understand the problem they're trying to solve. And then you have to be somewhat selective about what things you do. You should never make promises that you can't keep, even if it means you can win a contract that you can't actually deliver on. So we try to be very careful to do the things that we do well, to not make promises we can't keep, and to make sure we understand what the government problem is that they're trying to solve. And a very good example for us was a couple of years ago. The government was looking for a way to try on orbit a new infrared sensor, a new generation of infrared sensor. And by working creatively with the government, by understanding what problem they were trying to solve, we were able to host that sensor on one of our commercial satellites, and we were able to get it on orbit in about 3 years at a cost that was about 15% of what the government would have had to pay if they'd tried to launch it themselves.
So exactly what they're looking for.
But by understanding what problem they were trying to solve and coming up with a solution to their problem, rather than just trying to sell them something that we wanted to do in any case, we were able to be creative. We were able to solve a problem for them and do something that was very innovative within the industry and kind of pave the way for future hosted payloads.
So you actually basically created a win-win situation for the government, for you, and then you're in business to serve them again.
We did, and we think it's going to show how the government can actually better leverage the capabilities of the commercial space industry for the future to save money and to do things they might not otherwise be able to afford to do.
That's a great example. Thank you very much. Tip, thank you very much for joining us this morning and coming in.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it, Hillary.
We hope you've enjoyed this morning's program, where Rick Parkington talked about technology and why technology really matters and how important it is to be entrepreneurial. And Tip Osterthaler gave us some unique insights into the procurement process and what needs to happen to improve that process. We hope you'll join us next week for Government Contracting Weekly.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.